The clink of crystal glasses and the low murmur of power deals filled the air of Kingsley's Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Everything about the place spoke of control. The white tablecloths ironed to military precision, the staff moving like clockwork, the heavy hush that fell whenever a billionaire walked through the doors. At the center table sat Richard Montgomery, owner of Montgomery Investments, a man whose signature could move markets and whose voice made people lean in. Yet tonight his attention wasn't on the meal or the murmured greetings from other titans of finance. It was on the small boy seated across from him. Lucas Montgomery, only 10 years old, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Metal braces clung to his legs like cages, a daily reminder of the accident that had stolen not only his ability to run, but also much of his joy. Richard had delayed this dinner for months, fearing the stares, the whispers, the awkwardness. He believed his son needed discipline and specialists, not pity. Every decision since the accident had been about control, controlling the environment, controlling emotions, controlling outcomes. Money could fix anything, Richard told himself. Money could even fix a child's broken spirit. But as he watched Lucas push peas around his plate, Richard felt a flicker of something he couldn't name. The boy's shoulders were hunched, his eyes downcast. Nothing in this gleaming room belonged to him. Nothing, except perhaps the soft melody from the live piano drifting through the dining hall. Richard glanced at his watch, thinking about the conference call he'd left unfinished. He didn't notice the young waitress at first, Diana Johnson, moving quietly between tables, carrying trays with a grace that belied her exhaustion. To him, she was just another employee in a world designed to serve people like him. What Richard didn't realize was that his perfectly controlled evening was seconds away from cracking. In this room built for power, his disabled son would reach for an unexpected hand. And a single, humble gesture, a dance step in the wrong place at the wrong time, would start to undo years of walls built by wealth, grief, and fear. A soft trill from the piano floated across the dining hall, a simple melody that somehow reached past the clink of cutlery and the low buzz of conversation. Lucas's small fingers tapped against his napkin, following the rhythm. His braces squeaked faintly whenever he shifted his legs under the table. For months his life had been a cycle of therapy rooms, doctor's offices, and quiet evenings at home. Here, under the chandelier's glow, he felt even smaller, more trapped, as if the gleaming restaurant walls were made of glass he could never break. Diana Johnson slid between tables with the quiet precision she had learned in 5 years of service. In a uniform designed to blend into the background, she carried a tray of sparkling water past Richard Montgomery's table. She caught a glimpse of the boy's restless fingers. Something in his face, the way his eyes followed the music, not the menu, reminded her of children she'd worked with at Freedom Steps, the small dance program she and her sister had built in their neighborhood. She kept walking. Staff weren't supposed to notice things like that. Lucas, however, noticed her. He had watched her move all evening, balancing trays as if they weighed nothing, smiling gently when customers ignored her. She looked like someone who belonged to the music, not to the restaurant. Without thinking, he pushed his chair back, the screech of metal on marble slicing through the hush. Richard looked up sharply. "Lucas, sit," he ordered under his breath. But the boy's eyes were fixed on Diana. Heart pounding, he reached out a trembling hand. "Will you dance with me?" His voice was barely louder than a whisper, but in the sudden silence it carried to every corner of the room. Cutlery froze in midair. Heads turned. The pianist hesitated, then continued playing. Manager Thornton appeared like a shadow. "Sir, control your son," he hissed toward Richard. "This is inappropriate. Our employees are not here to entertain children." Richard felt the heat of 100 stares. "Lucas, sit down," he said firmly, the same tone he used with board members. But his son's hand remained suspended in the air, shaking. Diana stood motionless. Years of experience told her to avoid eye contact, to become invisible. She thought of her rent, her other jobs, the fragile dream of Freedom Steps. One wrong move could cost her everything. Yet another part of her, the part that had once taught children to stand tall despite braces and wheelchairs, refused to let the boy's hand hang unanswered. "Mr. Thornton, my shift is over," she said, setting her tray down. Her voice was calm but steady. She untied her apron and placed it neatly on the table. Then she turned to Lucas and smiled. "I can't dance in an apron." A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Richard rose abruptly. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm accepting an invitation, sir," Diana replied, meeting his gaze. Before anyone could intervene, Lucas stepped forward. The metal of his braces screeched against the floor. He dragged one foot, then another, clumsy but determined. Diana didn't guide him. She simply matched his halting rhythm, letting him lead. "She's getting fired tomorrow," whispered a woman at the next table. But something was happening inside Lucas. Fear flickered into concentration. Shame melted into shy pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being guided, helped, or corrected. He was leading. Richard stared, paralyzed. A memory of his late wife Elizabeth surfaced, her arms around Lucas in their living room, whispering, "It's not about perfection. It's about connection." He blinked hard, but the image stayed. All around him, the restaurant held its breath, waiting for his reaction. The manager hovered. Employees froze. Customers craned their necks. Lucas's small smile, however, was louder than all of it. Diana led him back to the table after 3 hesitant steps. She bowed slightly as if addressing an adult. "Thank you for asking me out. It was an honor." Then she turned to leave. "Wait," Richard said, his own voice strange to his ears. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." He nodded slowly, memorizing it. Reaching into his jacket, he handed her a card. "My office. Tomorrow at 10. Every eye in the room followed the exchange. Diana accepted the card without a word, though her hand trembled slightly. As she walked away, Lucas whispered, "Dad, why did you do that?" Richard had no answer. For the first time in years, his carefully controlled world had shifted, not through money or power, but through a simple human invitation. The next morning, Manhattan's skyline rose like a kingdom of glass and steel. At its center loomed Montgomery Tower, 52 stories of mirrored windows catching the early light. Inside, wealth moved like air, invisible, unquestioned, omnipresent. Diana Johnson had never been inside a building like this. The closest she had come was delivering takeout to the lobby years ago. Today she wasn't carrying trays or wearing a uniform. She wore a simple navy dress borrowed from her sister Zoe, and carried nothing but a folder with her notes on freedom steps. The receptionist barely glanced at her until she gave her name. "Ms. Johnson? Mr. Montgomery is expecting you. Top floor." The elevator ride felt endless. She saw her own nervous reflection in the polished doors. "What am I doing here?" she thought. One dance, 3 steps, and suddenly she was being summoned to meet one of the most powerful men in the country. When the elevator opened, she stepped into a world that looked like another planet. Marble floors, abstract art, a panoramic view of the city. At the far end of the room, Richard Montgomery stood with his back to her, staring out at the skyline. "Ms. Johnson," he said without turning. His voice carried the weight of authority, each word controlled, precise. "Mr. Montgomery," she answered, steadying her tone. He turned finally, his expression as unreadable as a banker's contract. "You embarrassed me last night." Diana blinked but didn't flinch. "Your son asked me to dance. I said yes. You could have refused. That's what most employees would have done." "Then maybe most employees shouldn't have been asked." For the first time, Richard's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not from someone who had carried water to his table. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit." Diana remained standing. "With respect, Mr. Montgomery, I didn't come here to be interrogated." "You asked me to meet you. Why?" The question seemed to unsettle him more than silence. He studied her, as if trying to decode how she had managed to shake his world without even meaning to. "You saw something in my son," he finally admitted. "Something I've spent millions trying to restore. Therapists, doctors, private instructors. None of them succeeded. And yet..." He hesitated, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. 3 steps. "With you." Diana softened slightly. "Because I didn't lead him, he led me. That's all he wanted. A chance to take ownership of himself." Richard leaned forward across his sleek desk. "Tell me what you really do." "I work nights as a waitress. Days I run Freedom Steps, a community dance program for children with mobility challenges. We don't promise miracles. We give them a safe space to explore movement without judgment." "Unlicensed therapy?" His tone was sharp again. "Unfunded passion," she countered. "We have no grants, no sponsors, no investors. Just an old warehouse, music, and the belief that children are more than their diagnoses. For the first time, Richard sat back, studying her as if she were a puzzle. He could buy anything in the world, yet here was a woman who wouldn't even bend her words to please him. You turned down the manager, turned down the stairs, and now, he gestured toward her, you're standing in my office as if you belong here. I don't, Diana admitted honestly, but your son does. That's why I'm here. Silence filled the room. From the windows, the city roared with life, but inside, it was just the two of them. A billionaire used to obedience, and a waitress who refused to surrender her dignity. Richard finally spoke. I want to hire you, exclusively, to work with Lucas. The offer hung in the air, heavy with the promise of wealth and security. For someone like Diana, it could erase years of struggle overnight. But her eyes didn't waver. She thought of Zoe, of the children at the warehouse, of the walls decorated with handmade posters. She thought of Lucas's smile, not because he had achieved perfection, but because for 3 steps he had been free. No, she said quietly. Richard's face darkened. No, I don't work for people who try to buy solutions to emotional problems. Your son doesn't need me as an employee. He needs freedom. That's what Freedom Steps is about. If you want him to grow, bring him there, with the others. For a moment, Richard Montgomery, master of contracts and empires, had no words. He had faced rivals, senators, entire markets, but never a refusal so calm, so immovable. The meeting ended not with a contract, but with a card. Diana placed it gently on his desk. Classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. 4 p.m. first session is free. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the billionaire in silence. And for the first time in years, Richard Montgomery realized he didn't have control. For 3 days, the invitation sat untouched on Richard Montgomery's mahogany desk. The white card with Freedom Steps printed in blue looked absurd amid contracts worth billions. Each time he reached for his pen, his fingers hovered, then retreated. A part of him wanted to crumple it and throw it away. Another part, the part that had watched Lucas's shy smile at the restaurant, kept stopping him. Lucas, meanwhile, had been asking questions every evening. Dad, when do we go? We're busy this week, Richard muttered the first night. The second night, maybe next month. By the third, Lucas simply placed the card on his father's briefcase before bed without a word. It was not a rebellion. It was a plea. Richard sat alone in his study, staring at the framed awards on the wall. Most influential CEO, Visionary of the Year, Leader in Philanthropy. They felt hollow tonight. In his world, decisions were calculated moves on a chessboard. But now his own son was asking for something that didn't fit on any spreadsheet. The next afternoon, he found himself in the driveway, leaning against his Bentley. Lucas was in the back seat, clutching his adaptive crutches. His eyes were bright with an excitement Richard hadn't seen in months. The GPS on the dashboard blinked. Freedom Steps Community Center, 4 p.m. Richard gripped the steering wheel as if it might anchor him. The building they approached was nothing like Montgomery Tower. An old brick warehouse with faded paint, hand-drawn signs taped to the windows. A cluster of children and parents milled outside, some in wheelchairs, some with braces, some with no visible disability at all. Laughter spilled from the open doors. They're expecting us, Lucas said quietly. Richard almost answered, they're expecting you. He almost dropped Lucas off and drove away. Men like him didn't go inside places like this. They wrote checks, cut ribbons, and left. They did not sit on folding chairs while their children learned from strangers. Then he remembered Lucas's trembling hand reaching for Diana's in the restaurant. The determination in those 3 halting steps. Don't underestimate the power of a determined son, Diana had said. Richard killed the engine. Ready? Lucas asked, looking up at him. Richard swallowed his pride. Let's go in together. Lucas's small smile widened. Slowly, carefully, he swung his legs out of the car and adjusted his gadgets. Richard followed, his expensive sweater feeling like a costume. A breeze carried the scent of old wood and music. He felt out of place, yet strangely lighter, as though stepping across an invisible line. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed. Handmade posters lined the walls with phrases like, your rhythm, your rules, and every move counts. Children moved to a light beat, Some spinning in wheelchairs, others hopping on prosthetic legs, all of them creating their own sequences. It looked chaotic, but their faces shone with focus and joy. Richard shifted uncomfortably. "It's noisy. There's structure," Diana said behind him. She was in simple clothes with the program's logo, not the uniform he remembered. "It's just not the one you recognize." Lucas stared at the other children as if he'd entered another universe. Diana crouched to his level. "Want to join in?" Lucas hesitated, glancing at his father. "Go on," Richard said tensely. "I'll be right here." As Diana guided Lucas toward the group, Zoe approached with a folding chair. "The first day is always the hardest," she murmured. "For the parents, not the kids." Richard sat, feeling more exposed than at any press conference. He watched as his son slowly began to mimic the children's movements, unsure but curious. Around him, parents clapped softly for their kids' small victories. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. Nobody was buying anything. They were simply present, and for the first time, Richard Montgomery, the man who controlled everything, sat still and let someone else lead his son. The studio door opened again, and the music momentarily softened. An older woman walked in leaning on an ornate cane. Her gray braids were arranged like a crown, and her presence shifted the room without her saying a word. The children looked up and waved. Parents whispered her name with respect. Zoe bent toward Richard. "Dr. Elaine Mercer," she murmured. "Neuroscientist, retired from Harvard." Richard's head snapped around. "The Dr. Mercer? The one whose proposal I rejected 3 times," the older woman finished gently, now standing right in front of him. "Yes, Mr. Montgomery, I didn't expect to see you here." She smiled at Lucas, who was attempting a slow spin with another boy. "He's extraordinary." Richard cleared his throat, unsettled. "I thought this was just a dance class." Dr. Mercer tapped her cane once on the floor. "Freedom Steps is a pilot program. We're studying how non-directive movement, when a child is allowed to lead instead of being guided, can rewire neural pathways. It's a form of motor rehabilitation based on movement autonomy. Or in simple words, we teach the brain to heal itself by giving children freedom to choose." Richard stared at her. "Research here in this warehouse?" Diana appeared at his side, her expression calm but steady. "Yes, with almost no funding. Because people like you rejected us 3 times. You," Richard's voice trailed. "You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on those proposals." "Co-author," Dr. Mercer corrected. "She wrote half the theoretical framework herself." Diana shrugged. "I had to leave my master's program to support my sister. We kept the project alive however we could." Waiting tables paid the bills, the penny dropped. Richard suddenly saw the network of threads connecting the woman in front of him, the research he had ignored, and the moment at the restaurant. "You knew who I was that night. From the moment you walked in," Diana confirmed. "And when Lucas stood up to dance, I recognized an opportunity to show, not tell. The dance wasn't staged. Your son chose to get up. I chose to follow." A group of reporters entered the studio, cameras slung over their shoulders. Richard immediately stiffened. "What is this?" "Part 2 of the plan," Diana said softly. Zoe handed him a freshly printed magazine. Across the cover blazed the headline, "Revolutionary Motor Rehabilitation Methodology Shows Promising Results." "We published our first data today," Dr. Mercer explained. "And we invited the press. You used my son for a public relations stunt." Richard's voice went cold. "No," Diana answered quietly. "Lucas used his own courage to take a first step. We gave him the space to do it." She led him into a small side room. Photographs of dozens of children lined the walls, each with handwritten notes about their progress. First balance, first independent step, first dance. On the far wall, an empty frame hung. "What's that?" he asked. "Our future," Diana said. "The rehabilitation center we could build if we had resources. 500 children a year instead of 50. "You orchestrated all this," Richard muttered. "The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. I saw an opportunity and took it," she said simply. 4 months ago, you canceled our meeting without reading our proposal. I promised myself I'd find another way to reach you." Before Richard could respond, Zoe burst into the room. "It's Lucas," she gasped. They hurried back into the studio. The music had stopped. Children stood in a circle watching. Lucas had removed one of his braces and was trying to balance on a single support. "Lucas!" Richard started forward, but Diana put a hand on his arm. "Wait." she whispered. Watch. Lucas took a deep breath, eyes focused. And then, to everyone's astonishment, he took a complete step without full support. Small, shaky, but entirely his. The children erupted in cheers. Camera flashes lit the room. Richard Montgomery's face, usually unreadable, was bare now, eyes glistening. That, Diana said softly beside him, is why we created Freedom Steps. It's not about perfect steps. It's about first steps on your own. For the first time, Richard saw his son not as a patient or a problem, but as a whole human being discovering his own strength. The room was electric. Children clapped and shouted encouragement as Lucas, cheeks flushed, balanced on his own for a second time. Camera flashes went off in a staccato rhythm like a drum beat. Richard Montgomery stood frozen, the billionaire mask stripped away. For once there was no boardroom, no contract, no script, only his son and a single trembling step that felt larger than any business deal he had ever made. Zoe's phone buzzed incessantly. Journalists were already posting videos. A reporter called out, "Mr. Montgomery, is it true you're funding this program?" Another shouted, "What's your comment on the breakthrough we just witnessed?" Richard turned slowly, the weight of their questions pressing against his chest. He had built his entire life on being in control, but at this moment control seemed small compared to courage. Lucas, still wobbling but smiling wider than Richard had seen in years, lifted his hand in a small wave to his father. It was an unspoken plea, "See me. Not your plans, not your fears. See me." Diana stepped forward, ready to shield the boy from the cameras if needed. "We can end this now," she whispered. "Just say the word." Richard inhaled deeply. "No," he said quietly. "Let them stay." He walked to the center of the room and crouched to his son's level. "Lucas," he said softly, "you were incredible." The boy's eyes shimmered. I wanted you to see," Lucas murmured. "I wanted you to see me walk." "I do," Richard said. "I see you, and I'm proud." He stood up and turned to face the cameras. "For years," he began, his voice carrying across the studio, "I believed that money could solve anything, injuries, grief, even hope. I was wrong. My son just taught me something I had forgotten. The power of freedom and courage." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of recording devices. Richard glanced at Diana and Dr. Mercer. "This program, Freedom Steps, isn't just a charity case. It's science, it's art, it's humanity. I rejected it because I didn't understand it. That changes today." He pulled a pen from his jacket and signed the folder Zoe handed him, a formal pledge for a multi-million-dollar grant. Gasps filled the room. "I'm funding the center," he announced. "Not tomorrow. Now. And it will be free for families who can't afford therapy." Reporters fired questions at him. "Why the sudden change?" one asked. Richard smiled faintly. "Because my son walked. Because a waitress showed me more leadership than half the executives I've ever met. And because real power isn't about control. It's about giving others the chance to rise." He handed the signed folder back to Zoe and turned again to Lucas, who was now surrounded by other children cheering his name. "You're the bravest person in this room," he said. Diana's eyes glistened. "This will change lives," she whispered. Richard nodded. "It already has." The music began again, softer now, a gentle rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat. Lucas extended his hand toward his father. Richard hesitated only a second before stepping into the circle. He removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and took his son's hand. Together they moved, awkwardly at first, then more surely, as the children clapped and the cameras rolled. For the first time in years, Richard wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't negotiating or controlling. He was simply a father moving to his child's rhythm. And in that moment, the billionaire realized he wasn't just funding a program, he was stepping into a new life. 6 months later, the once empty frame on the studio wall was filled. It held a photograph of the newly opened Montgomery Freedom Center, a bright glass-walled building where sunlight streamed into wide dance halls and therapy rooms. Children of every background moved freely across polished floors. Parents watched from balconies, some crying, some laughing, all witnessing little miracles of first steps, first spins, first moments of confidence. Richard stood quietly at the edge of the main hall. His suit was gone, replaced by rolled-up sleeves and a volunteer badge. Lucas' braces reduced now to a light support strap, darted between groups helping new kids feel comfortable. He had become a small ambassador for the program. Every time Richard saw his son move with that new confidence, he felt another brick fall from the wall he'd built around his own heart. Diana was in the center of the room leading a session. No longer a waitress, but a program director. Her research finally recognized. Dr. Mercer consulted with visiting doctors and therapists from other states, their clipboards full of notes. What had started as a rejected proposal had become a national pilot attracting attention from universities and news outlets. A local TV crew approached Richard for a comment. He smiled into the camera, no longer stiff, no longer defensive. "This center isn't about me," he said simply. "It's about freedom, the freedom to move, to dream, to heal. It started with a single step my son took, and now it's a movement." Behind him, Lucas called out, "Dad, come dance with us." Without hesitation, Richard crossed the floor, his shoes echoing lightly on the wood, and joined the circle of children. The cameras kept rolling, but he didn't notice. For the first time in a long time, his life was not about being a billionaire, but about being a father and a man willing to change. As the music swelled and dozens of children spun together, the billionaire who had once believed only in control now believed in something greater, giving others room to rise, to heal, and to lead. And that, he realized, was wealth that could never run out.